Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Sam Sussman is my guest today. He is the author of the USA Today best-selling novel called Boy from the North Country. The book was named by Oprah as the best debut novel of the fall 2025 and hailed by Kirkus as, quote, the most beautiful and moving mother-son story in recent memory. Sam previously won the BAFTA New Writing Award for Original Screenplay and wrote the Harper's Magazine memoir, The Silent Type, on possibly being Bob Dylan's son. He graduated with a BA from Swarthmore College and a master's in philosophy from Oxford, and he's lived in Berlin and Jerusalem. Sam has taught writing and literature seminars in England, India, Peru, and Chile, and participated in the PEN World Voices Festival of International Literature 3 times. He lives in the Yorkville neighborhood of Manhattan and his native Hudson Valley. Sam was recently profiled in the New York Times. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you for having me, Abby.
Nice to be here. This is the beautiful cover of your beautiful book, Boy from the North Country. Let's start with the nonfiction piece that informs the fiction. I know we want to focus on the story here, but it's grounded in something true. Can you just give us as much as you're willing to share that gives us a sense of sort of the scaffolding for you?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned in the lovely introduction, I wrote a nonfiction memoir essay for Harper's Magazine, which centers on the story of my mother's relationship with Dylan. And I'll tell the story like this. So I grew up with my mom in the Hudson Valley, and when I was a young teenager, I had a teacher take me aside one day and say, you know, you really look like this musician. Have you ever heard of him? Name's Bob Dylan.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. I'm not sleepy and there is no place I'm going to.
So I looked up the music and I started listening to it, and like millions of other teenagers, I was completely taken by it. One day I was in the car with my mom's partner at the time, and a Dylan song came on, and he looked at me and he said, you know, your mother used to know him.
My senses have been stripped, my hands can't feel the grip.
And I thought, no, it can't make any sense. I mean, to me, Dylan was, you know, it would be like saying, oh, your mom used to know Shakespeare. I mean, I wasn't thinking of Dylan as a living person, but as an artist who I was listening to his work from 40 years before. And so I talked to my mom about it, and at first she said, no, I didn't know Dylan. And then she said, well, I did know Dylan, and I met him a long time before you were born. And then she started slowly talking to me about the fact that they'd had a romantic relationship. And then she told me that they had met the year before I was born. And so Again.
They had sort of a reunion.
That's right. And so naturally that raised all sorts of questions for me. And the memoir essay I wrote is about how that sort of search or that feeling that I had to get an answer to that question, or that question defined me.
Is he or is he not your father?
That's right. That gradually gave way over time to experiencing and understanding myself as my mother's son. That she was the person who had raised me and who had made me who I am. And I write in that essay about the experience of being with her at the end of her life, when many of those feelings started to solidify within me. So the story, both the essay and the novel Boy from the North Country, they're a search for the father that ends in finding the mother.
Beautiful. And we start really with this phone call where she's finally asking you to come home. It unfolds, we realize that she's actually sicker than you realized. What's so exquisite is, first of all, you respond instantaneously, but then the book is really, it's kind of a walk through what made you who you are without realizing you were unpacking it in real time, or that it was kind of the last gasp of getting information about yourself, even as you were taking care of her. Can you just give a sense of just how you decided to structure the book, and then we can kind of get into what happens?
Well, I think the book is it's a sort of dual coming of age story. It's the coming of age of the character who I give my life experiences, who I call Evan, and the character who I give my mother's experiences.
Evan is actually your middle name.
It's my middle name, that's right. And that felt appropriate for an autobiographical novel.
Because you're in it and not in it.
It's part of me, but not all of me, right? And the same with my mother, who I called June. Her middle name was Juna, for Juna Barnes.
Oh, nice.
So the way that the novel is structured is that Evan has come home to be with June, and he has left Goshen where he grew up. He's determined to find himself abroad. He's lived abroad. Now he's in his mid-20s, his mother's sick. He's come home, and he's starting to think more deeply about, have I found what I'm looking for out in the world, and what have I actually overlooked about who I am that I can find through my experience of homecoming? And then what's happening is that June is slowly telling Evan these stories of her life. And she's relating these formative experiences that are set in the bohemian arts world of mid-1970s New York, when her relationship with Dylan began. And what we really have is the story of each of these people, Evan and June, and the events that have brought them together, drawn them apart, and are now bringing them together again.
The way that information is shared and not shared, the decisions to tell and not tell, that was just so powerful running through this. And how were you kind of playing with what we reveal, even to the people closest to us, or kind of choose not to?
Well, I think that's such an interesting part of intimacy, what we share with other people, what we choose not to. You know, when I came home to be with my mother, much like Evan, I knew that she was sick, she had cancer, but I didn't know that her illness was terminal. And so that was something that I slowly learned as I went through day by day, being with her and trying to care for her. And I struggled afterwards with her decision not to tell me that. And what I came to understand was that for her, that was a way of living and celebrating each day that we had, right? And not letting that shadow of mortality or death shape those experiences. But in terms of telling, I knew that I wanted this to be the story of a mother telling a son who she is. And I think, you know, for many of us, if we're lucky to have that kind of relationship with a parent and come into an adult understanding of who our parents are, that's a transformative and profound experience, and that's what I wanted to write about.
Food plays such an important role. I kind of got used to the cooking and the health of the cooking. Is that something that you are actually really familiar with, and did that kind of echo what your time was like with her?
Yeah, absolutely. My mother loved food. She worked as a holistic health practitioner, so in what we would now describe as wellness culture. And so she was drawing on training in psychology and nutrition, meditation, all of these different forms to help people live healthier lives. And food was an enormous part of that. She would always say, you know, healthy food tastes good. People think there's actually a moment in the book where Evan says to June, you know, don't you ever crave anything sweet, like a pie or a Swedish fish? And she says something sweet like a fresh apple. You know, and that was my mom. Everything that she ate was organic food grown within a few miles of where we lived in the Hudson Valley, and she had a great love for food and for nature and
simple cooking. And when she's really weak and the chemo is giving her very little appetite, you have this kind of almost just obstinate optimism. Yeah. It's like you just refuse to believe this is not going to take a turn towards health, towards life. And the food is almost like that's your way of keeping her alive and maybe even having a different faith. Yeah. That it was going to turn out differently. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, she had said to me when she was sick that I'm going to get to the point where the chemo drains me of appetite, and I'm going to say that I don't want to eat, but you have to make sure that I do.
Wow.
Right? And so, I mean, I grew up with my mom cooking this wonderful, nutritious food, and now I'm not a very good cook, But for the first time in my life, in my mid-20s, I had to try to make food that she would eat. I had to try to cook like her. And that was a way of returning the love that she had given to me back to her. And that's so much the heart of this book. It's a son learning to return his mother's love.
It struck me just, we all love our, not we all love our mothers. I love my mother, but it felt like there was something uncomplicated in your love. And maybe it's just because it's the end, but it doesn't feel like you had any residual issues to resolve or scores to settle. Can you?
I'm not sure about that. You know, Evan, my character, is very insistent that June speak to him about this open question in their relationship, which is her relationship with Dylan and what the truth of that situation is. And it's a major point of resentment and frustration for Evan. And what happens is that he's insisting to June, you have to tell me about that period of your life. There's a moment where he says, you know, I don't know anything about who you were when you were my age because you've refused to talk to me about this. And then a third of the book is her recounting this experience of her youth. And Evan thinks that that story is bringing him toward Dylan. But what's actually happening is that that is bringing him closer to her, closer to an understanding of who she was and what formative events shaped her. And that's bridging a certain understanding that has been silent in their relationship. And there have been aspects of who this mother and son are that neither has understood. And that they're bridging that in what turn out to be the last weeks of their lives.
And there's aspects to that unknown life that she lived that include a painting class that she took, the fact that she took acting classes with Stella Adler, who we all know was a giant and a terrifying giant as an instructor. Can you just address that snapshot and then how Dylan is weaving in and out through this painting class? I think most people don't realize there is truth in that he actually was, I guess, an amateur painter.
Yeah, absolutely. So June wants to be an artist. She goes to Bennington College, doesn't quite fit in, has a very frustrating experience with an older male professor who, instead of taking her seriously as a writer, essentially makes a pass at her. And she moves to New York and she starts studying with these two iconic American Jewish artists, Stella Adler and Norman Rabin, who's the youngest child of Sholem Aleichem. And she starts playing Hedda Gabler in the underground theater scene. And one day, Dylan walks into Rabin's class. So I should say, outside the confines of the book, I mean, in life, Rabin is one of the few artists who Dylan has credited with transforming his work. Wow. In the late 70s, he gave an interview where he says that Rabin, I think he says, he took my hand and my eye and he taught me how to see again. So my mom met Dylan in that painting class. And what we see
that was in Carnegie Hall, right?
That's right. It was on the 11th floor of Carnegie Hall. Dylan walked into that painting class at this absolute low moment of his life. He was going through a divorce. He was 33.
Stagnating a little bit artistically.
He felt that he hadn't written anything worthwhile since Blonde on Blonde, right? So we think of him as this iconic artist, but in that moment, he's a 33-year-old who feels he hasn't written anything worthwhile since he was 25, right? And he's come to Rabin because Rabin has this reputation for taking artists of one form and using painting to return them to something that is true in their primary form. Okay, so my mother meets Dylan in this class, and over that summer, under Rabin's influence, he turns himself out of this artistic crisis and into the songs that become Blood on the Tracks. And we get a bird's eye view of that artistic process.
And he's playing some of the songs for her, you write, in her apartment on 78th Street. Right?
Yeah, that's right. He's playing, and my mom had amazing stories about Dylan's just complete commitment to his guitar and his writing.
Showing up at 3 a.m, playing some bars, sometimes on the fire escape. It's amazing.
That's right.
You live in that apartment.
I do live in that apartment.
Wow.
That's
And wrote
right.
in that apartment.
I wrote the novel in this apartment, yeah. That's
And
right.
so the Stella Adler piece, give us a flavor for that.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, Adler and Rabin are such fantastic
They
characters
are.
because,
It's hard to believe they're real, but we know they were.
That's
Just
right.
outsized.
you know, they were each highly accomplished artists who decided at a certain moment in their life that what they wanted to do was teach, to pass on their artistic tradition to the next generation. And Adler is this towering figure. She refuses to give a compliment. At a certain point, she says to June, if you're fishing for a compliment, go look in some other sea. And, you know,
Pond, didn't you say pond?
it might have been Pond, but she, that's why no author should quote from their own work. But Stella Adler and Rabin, they're these taskmasters. You know, they believe that they don't care what the credentials are of anyone who comes into their class, right? My mother was a college dropout, right? But the only credential for them is, will you let me yell at you until I turn you into an artist, or you realize you have a different calling in life, right?
So it's kind of like in that crucible, you're going to come out an actor, a painter, or not.
That's right.
But I'm not going to pull punches along the way because they were merciless.
They were. There's a great story my mother had about Rabin, which is, well, if he didn't like something you were painting, he would either walk over, throw the canvas off the easel onto the floor, or he'd just start painting over it.
Wow.
And there was one student who, he hated her canvas one day, he threw it onto the floor, and he said, if there's any hope for you, you have to start at the absolute beginning. He handed her a Torah, and he said, go sit on the floor and start reading this.
Wow. You mentioned Torah. There is such a Jewish thread through this book, and it happens in a way wonderfully, almost by accident. Like you don't set up, like, here's the Jew section.
Yeah.
And since we're on JBS, if you could just address how that's running through the story for you, why it's important.
I think it's an interesting question. What is a Jewish novel? For many of us, it might be a novel that happens to be written by a Jew, or the characters happen to be Jewish. But the artists in Boy from the North Country, they think something else. They're all Jewish artists who are intentionally drawing on a certain spiritual and artistic tradition within Judaism. In Rabin's case, that was a tradition of Jewish literature that went back to the Torah. Right? For Adler, that was being shaped by the world of the New York Yiddish theater world, right? And then there's also in the background of the book, we have Mark Chagall and Leonard Cohen, and we find Dylan at one of his most Jewish moments because he's under the influence of Rabin.
He was Robert Zimmerman, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. And for me, look, Judaism means so many things to so many people. But if you asked me on one foot, I would say what Judaism is a way of taking moral wisdom from one generation to the next through a story. That's what we're doing. And so that's how I want to approach this novel. I want to take the way that my mother lived, what mattered to her in life, her values, put them into a story.
I love that. I mean, it was heartbreaking, but Evan calls his grandmother when his mother passes, and she's almost insistent, let's say the Shema, like twice. And it's such a relatable moment. It's such a raw one. Can you tell us, is that based in truth, that moment?
Well, what I'll say is that I think there's a certain emotional truth of that experience. What Evan says is, I don't know the words. And his grandmother says, yes, you do, say them with me. And they say the words together. And part of what I'm interested in the book and in that moment is, you know, Evan, like myself, has not had a conventional Jewish upbringing, but he's found a deep Jewish identity spiritually and artistically, right? And his grandmother is still saying to him, this tradition is yours. Even if you don't know the words, say them with me. You belong within this tradition.
And it should be mentioned for our viewers that this book has been the choice, the winning selection for New Reads, the JBC's selection, and for Jewish Book Month. We all know and love JBC, the Jewish Book Council, and New Reads, as in so new, NU Reads, is something you should look up, and it's very deservedly their pick. Just before we leave the Jewish piece, when you look at Dylan's work or his, how do you say, kind of aura in the world, do you connect Jewishly at all to the music, to the songs, to the lyrics?
Absolutely. I mean, he's the only rock star who ever thought that the Aikada would work better as a rock song, right? I do think, look, one of the things that is remarkable about Dylan as an artist is the way in which he's reaching into different literary traditions and trying to make them his own and create something new out of that. And we see him in the novel do that with Renaissance poetry. It's what he does with the American Songbook. And I think it's also what he's doing with Jewish narrative and literary tradition. And his songbook is rife with those references. And yeah, that when I was first listening to his music, that is something that struck me, absolutely.
The scene in the book where Evan asks his mother, takes his mother to go see Dylan together is just an incredible scene, and partly because she's so weak, but she's game. And it's just such a powerful internal dialogue or monologue that's happening with Evan at that point. Am I looking at my father? Am I listening to my father up there? It's just so big as an idea and as a question that doesn't really get answered. What was the choice to have that moment where he's actually watching him perform?
Well, my mother and I went to see Dylan, and it was an extraordinarily powerful emotional experience, and I wanted to write about that. And it's also the way that I situate it in the novel is that it's the moment where, in some ways, June pays the highest price for Evan's determination to know the answer to this question. Because she's not well enough to go to the concert. She's going through chemotherapy, and she says yes anyway, because she knows how important it is to Evan. And Evan is sitting there listening to Dylan play, and he's realizing for the first time in his life what his mother has protected him from. That for Dylan, he's such an iconic figure. And June talks often about how no one ever sees Dylan. They see his reflection in the mirror. They see their idea of who he is. They don't see him as a person. Right? And Evan is realizing that if he were to be understood primarily as Dylan's child, he will never have a chance to be himself. And so much of the search in Boy from the North Country is about Evan's desire to become himself as a person, as a man, as an artist. And it's that moment where he's coming into that realization, and that shapes how he relates to the question in the rest of the book.
Your mom repeated, nothing in this life is holier than love. And I guess I would just love to end with you reflecting on what that actually means, because it felt to me like there was more teeth to it than something just reflective. It was like she was saying something urgent to you. To Evan.
Well, I think part of the book is about me understanding what she meant by that phrase, because sometimes when our parents say things like that, they sound like slogans, and we don't understand the experience that's behind those ideas. And so much of this book is about me as a son coming into an understanding of what were the experiences that made my mother feel that way about life, right? What were the experiences that earned her that slogan or idea? And so much of the book is about how she struggles to find love, right? But that she never stops believing in it. Love for other people, for her children, and also her belief in romantic love. And it's about her telling what was that struggle and what was that belief and that optimism and faith.
So I'd love you to leave us with just how she is walking with you now, because it feels very much like this is not just a tribute to her, but she's part of it in a really deep way.
Yeah, I feel my mom every day. I write her a letter every Sunday. I feel her within me. And I think we live in a culture that often struggles to imagine the connection between the living and the dead. And for me, this book has been a way of spending more time with her, talking to her, bringing her forward into this period of my life, and that's been a great gift.
The book is Boy from the North Country by Sam Sussman. Thank you for being with us. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight, and I'll see you next time.